Welcome, everybody, to episode 242 of WordPress Weekly for Wednesday, July 20th, 2016. I'm your host, Jeff Chandler, joined by Marcus Couch.
Hello.
Hello. Marcus, what's up, my main man?
Oh, just doing a ton of projects this week. Trying to catch what I can of a little convention action going on in town on the second monitor. And, just ready to talk some WordPress Weekly today.
Yeah, we have an awesome guest, which we'll get to in a little bit, but I have to take care of some housekeeping. Before we get started here, there is one news item I wanted to mention at the beginning of the show, and that is today, WordPress 4.6 Beta 4 has been released. This is the last beta before they start the release candidate stage. And in this most recent beta, there's a couple of different fixes. Emoji support has been updated to include all the latest Unicode 9 emoji characters, so there's a couple new ones there. There's been a lot of other various bug fixes as well, and the release candidates pretty much, that's when it should be packaged to the point where you could use it in a production environment, which you shouldn't do for RC1. You should still test it on a staging site, but that's what the whole release candidate stage is all about, that it could be released if it needed to be, but it's probably going to go through 2 or 3 release candidate stages, and then I think it's due out in maybe August was when we'll see WordPress 4.6. So everybody out there, get testing, and if you find a bug, make sure to report it on the alpha beta area of the support forums. Help everybody out by reporting it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one, and I'm going to install that on a few stage sites, migrate an existing site over to a stage, and then install this beta release and see how it works.
And outside of that, I wanted to give a shout out, Marcus, to a person by the name of Jay Snyder, who left a comment on the episode 241 show notes post. And I found out that he listens to our show Friday mornings. It's like we're part of his routine in New Zealand. And one of the things he says is that he gets really jealous about hearing about all these different WordCamps due to living in New Zealand and not a major city. Where there are not many WordPress people around. And I happened to take a look at WordCamp Central, which is where you could see past and upcoming WordCamps. And the last WordCamp that took place in New Zealand was in 2014 in the city of Auckland. So they've been WordCampless for at least 1.5 years now, and there is no, from what I could see on the schedule, there's not one scheduled for New Zealand in this year, so it doesn't look likely that there'll be a WordCamp in New Zealand this year. But maybe someone's out there, whoever's listening, maybe in the area, maybe Jay can get in contact with somebody and get something going there, because there has been a WordCamp in New Zealand a couple of years ago. I think there was 3 or 4 different ones. So I mean, there's somebody there that knows what to do to get one together, but they're going through a WordCamp drought right now. Poor Jay Snyder, man, but at least he's got us to listen to hear about all the cool stuff going on in the WordPress world.
Yes, and you can make your own WordCamp at home by going to WordPress.tv.
Well, yeah, I guess there's that. Boy, it's pretty cheap accommodations, if you're watching it from the comfort of your living room and whatnot.
Bring some buddies over, maybe have a food truck stop by your house a little bit later.
Yeah, have everything catered. That'd be pretty cool. So just shout out to the Jay. Thanks a lot for listening to our show all the way from down under New Zealand. Pretty much down under.
They say down under down there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's
Australia.
Well, it's close enough.
It's near down under.
Yeah.
It's over there. We'll just say that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't want to get any Australians out there upset. Getting my rainmaster.
I was talking about the New Zealand people getting upset.
Oh well. Okay.
Come on now.
All right. So there's our geography lesson for the day.
Yes.
So Marcus, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest, Eric Meyer?
Well, I am happy to. As soon as I can find the page. Eric Meyer is an American web design consultant and author. He is best known for his advocacy work on behalf of web standards, most notably cascading style sheets, otherwise known as CSS, which is a technique for managing how HTML is displayed. Eric has written a number of books and articles on CSS and given many presentations promoting its use, amongst other great topics that he's presented. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the show tonight. Been looking forward to this ever since I watched your keynote presentation at WordCamp Northeast Ohio, which was a pretty darn cool presentation, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But uh, just wanted to start off by asking you, how did you get involved with technology, and specifically this thing we call CSS?
Well, those two things are actually separated by quite a lot of time. I
Oh,
first got
really?
involved with technology in the late 70s when I was myself about 7. Um, I don't even remember exactly. There was like some kind of a computer summer day camp kind of deal, and I don't remember if I asked to go or my parents just figured I could try it or whatever. But it was a little bit of basic programming, and then we had a TRS-80 color computer, Model 1, the with the 16K extended color basic. That's 8K ROM and 8K RAM. Graduated to a Commodore 64 as we moved through the 80s, and then had a DOS machine when I went to college. So I've been using technology for a really long time. The web, on the other hand, I ran into shortly after I graduated from college in middle to late 1993. Came across the web thanks to a friend and a coworker by the name of Jim Nauer. He showed me an early version of Mosaic, and one of the betas. I don't remember exactly which one, and I was completely instantly hooked. I was like, "This is amazing! This is the greatest thing." It was after the IMG element was added, so images could be embedded in pages at that point. Was when I first saw it. And then a few years later, I was at the 5th International World Wide Web Conference and was basically sitting in the W3C track at that conference where they were just saying, here's the stuff that the W3C is working on. And one of the presentations was about this thing called cascading style sheets that I had never heard of. And there was a presentation, again, I was blown away by what seemed to be possible in that presentation. That's how I came into it.
Don't take this the wrong way, but Marcus, I think Eric is the oldest gentleman, the oldest uh, guest we've had on this show.
Well, I think I might be older than him, so don't worry about it.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, you're I guess you're right there, but yeah, CSS. I mean, going back to the early days. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm about 32, so I mean, I I don't have to go back that far, but I remember finally getting to grips with this thing called HTML, where you could do marquees and blinky tags, and you had to specify in HTML your background color and this color and that color, and eventually when I finally discovered these things called dynamic content management systems that were built with PHP and their themes use CSS. Once I discovered CSS for the first time, and I realized that, wow, I could just put in a hex value here and change the color of the background, and I started learning all the different selectors. Man, it was like a whole new world to me. It was really cool.
Well, we learned how to change the color by using the command poke 53280,
I have no idea.
And we
what
liked
that
it.
means.
We were grateful for what we had. I've been working on my grumpy old, 4 Yorkshiremen of the web for a really long time. You kids today with your fancy part drives and your mice, all we had was a keyboard and a cassette tape, and we were
Floppy
glad.
disks were actually floppy.
Oh, dude, this was before floppy disks. We had literal audio cassette tapes that we recorded
Yep.
our programs onto and then played them back.
Oh man.
Yes, when you think of like a literal, like a disk operating system, not to specifically refer to DOS, but like the disk partition table where it keeps track of where everything is. I always envision that as the little wheelie counters on the top of the cassette player, because you would have a cassette and then there would be a piece of paper that would say, like, from counter 001 to 007 is this program, and from 009, because you wanted to leave a little space, you didn't want to record over the last part of your previous program, from 009 to 019 was this other program that you had saved. And you literally, to save the program to the cassette player, is you got your save command set up on your command line, and then you hit record, play record on the cassette player, and you hit return, and then you waited for the computer to tell you it was done, and then you hit stop on the cassette tape.
Man, I feel like I've traveled on the Wayback Machine for technology.
And that's how it worked.
Wow. So,
Yep.
so what was it like in the early days? I noticed that you were one of the people alongside Mark Andreessen, and I think even Marcus has a bit of experience in this, but working on the Mosaic project, which I guess eventually turned into Netscape.
Well, that would be Marcus. I did not actually work on that project. I was just making web pages with Mosaic, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, and what was that experience like working with a browser at that time with CSS?
Well, I mean, early on it was pretty great because HTML was very simple. Actually, when I started out, there was no CSS. There was just document markup, and it was even before Netscape 1.1. So we didn't even have table markup to lay out the pages, right? Like we couldn't even do tables and spacer images because that markup wasn't even supported yet. But what was great about it, and I think this is still true. What was great about it is that you could just do it, right? Like you could just open up a text editor, or in my case, I had, I think, Microsoft Word, literally, and I was like typing up the markup and the content, and then save as text, with a .htm extension, and then loading it up in a browser and seeing what happened, and then, oh, this part looks like I messed that up. I need to go back and fix the tag, and just that like incredibly closed loop of sort of feedback was really, and that we still have that, right? And that plus the fact that HTML is so, I mean, it's almost scandalously fault tolerant, right? Like you could throw anything at a web browser and it will do its best to render everything that it can.
That's true.
Right? Instead of just like error or even error at this place, right? It's, well, here's what I got of that. Here, I tried. This is what I got, and you could say to yourself, okay, that's not what I intended. Was it me, or is it, or, did I mess up the markup, or did I not understand this? But again, because there was always, or at least almost always, something, right? It wasn't just, oh, I just got this error. It was, oh, well, that was partly what I wanted. Now let me figure out how to fix it so that it's all what I wanted. And I think that was, and still is, a really huge incentive. It really lures people in because, like, right from the outset, they can feel like, okay, I'm doing something, right? I'm not stupid here. I may have messed some stuff up, but I'm also getting some stuff right. Whereas compiled languages or imperative languages, even that aren't compiled, that are runtime interpreted, a lot of times it's, I forgot a semicolon, so the whole thing fails.
Yeah.
Or, right.
And I'll add to that too, which is during that time, it was an amazing time to be involved in online things, even in the dial-up phase, because you were able for the first time to see pages that other people had made and look at the source and go, well, how did they do that? And that, I think, inherently really accelerated the cycle in which we all started designing better pages and more functionality.
Yeah, because of course the web was small enough then that you could surf around.
Right.
You could surf around the web and see a significant portion of what was new that week. I still remember the NCSA What's New page, where once a week there would be a listing of, hey, here are the new web servers that have gone online, and here's like a couple sentences to describe what the site is about. Like there were few enough sites that was actually a thing that someone could do. And so yeah, you might surf to a new site, or get onto a new site from that page, and then be like, how did they do that? View source. Wow, that's how they did it. Yeah, so that was definitely part of it as well. And again, still is. Figuring out how a WordPress install works, or figuring out how a WordPress theme works, sometimes can be as simple as viewing source and figuring out like what's the structure here, what's the CSS.
Yeah, even what plugins are they using?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the favorite tool these days of the web tinkerer is the inspect element tool in most modern browsers. Isn't
Yes,
that
yes,
fun?
yes, yes. It is. I love it. I especially love it when you turn on browser styles and you inspect elements, and then you suddenly realize, wait, what? So maybe Marcus can provide some insight on this. I'd actually be interested to hear. If you turn on show browser styles in like Chrome, I'll just pick Chrome as an example. Chrome is not the only one. And you inspect a block quote element, you will discover that the block quote element has a 40 pixel left margin because that's what Mosaic did.
Mm-hmm.
It's not ems, it's not rems, it's not a percentage of the page. It is 40 pixels. And I'm just wondering, Marcus, do you know who did that? Who decided that?
I don't know who decided that, but I'll tell you why it's that.
Okay.
Is because we were using CRT monochrome monitors at the time, and there was a little bit of a curve to the left on a lot of things, and some things would get cut off.
Okay.
How about that?
There we go. So block quotes and also lists actually have 40 pixel indents.
Now, I don't know if that's the specific reason, by the way, but I do know that did come into play. And understand, I was in the early phases of the project, and then I went on
which is actually why I was hoping you would know. And the body element also has an 8 pixel either margin or padding. And I'm pretty sure the curved CRT monitor thing is probably why there's that padding around the body.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's 8 pixels around the body because that's what Mosaic did and has never changed. That has come forward these many years. At this point, 23, 24 years.
It may go 100. Who knows? Unless they invent something else.
It might, but it's kind of the fascinating thing. Once you start digging around in there, you start to realize, wow, there's a lot of history here. It's browser archaeology, basically.
Right.
That's cool. So your digital home on the web is meyerweb.com. That's your website. That's the place where you blog. And I noticed that it's powered by WordPress. And so I just kind of wanted to know, when did you get involved with WordPress? How long have you used it? And what do you think of it as a publishing system?
So I got started with WordPress around 2005, I believe.
Oh, that's
would have been
2004 at the beginning.
2005. I think it was 2005. Previous to that, I had been hand authoring all of the pages on the site, except for a brief period where I had decided that I would write all of my blog posts in a custom XML format, and then I hand wrote XSLT scripts to pour the XML through to turn it into HTML. I don't know what I was thinking. But I was like, okay, this is wacky, and also I would like people to be able to comment, and I don't want to roll my own commenting system. And it would also be nice if people could search blog posts, so I should put this all into a CMS. And I knew Matt Mullenweg. I'd met him at South by Southwest. And I just thought, yeah, I'll try this WordPress thing. Matt seems, like he's doing some interesting work. So I installed it. I should say MeyerWeb is partly WordPress.
Okay.
So the homepage and all of the blog archives are WordPress. Almost everything else is static in or hand authored. Some of it, there are bits of PHP that I hand wrote that are not part of the WordPress install. So I really only use it as a blogging engine. I don't use it as a full-featured CMS. Mostly because when I started using it, that's what it was. It was a blogging engine. It wasn't a complete CMS, and I have so much stuff that I would have to pour into the CMS that I don't have the time.
So
really.
So you're one of the few that have been using WordPress since near the beginning. I mean, what are your thoughts on the evolution, sometimes revolutionary ways that the project or the software has progressed?
It's been fascinating. I think where it went is completely understandable and makes sense. And we I mean, nothing in software is necessarily inevitable, but it almost feels inevitable that it would have gone from managing blogging content to being able to manage all content. And the power that it affords is pretty impressive, and especially the ability to extend it. Like, I've written my own plugins, a few of which I released. No one should go and download them because I wrote they haven't been updated in a very long time, and I'm sure they're completely insecure and probably don't even work in current versions of WordPress. But just that ability, I have a few that I've kept going for myself that it can be anything from changing how the number of comments is displayed to I want to roll my own calendar to I'm going to completely change entire portions of effectively the core functionality of WordPress. I mean, it was one of the first to really do that in a serious way, and I think that's always been a strength, is that ability for the community to come up with its own solutions. Some of which may eventually make their way into core, but if there's a plugin that everyone's using, or it's like 90% of WordPress sites use this plugin, then I'm sure the core team says maybe we should make that native.
Mm-hmm. So some of the next few questions we have sort of relate to the keynote presentation that you did at WordCamp Northeast Ohio, and the presentation was called Design for Real Life. And in this presentation, you give examples of products and websites that are developed, and you talk about creating personas and thinking about what a human would do, and you kind of gave some examples of some experiences that maybe the original product developers didn't think through. And then you also talk about edge cases and stress cases, and I want to start there for a moment. Now, in the WordPress world, I hear of an edge case, and that's maybe something that, for some obscure, unknown reason in a particular environment, something happens, and edge cases can be things that are pushed off to the side that maybe eventually we'll get to, or most of the time that's what ends up happening. But you were talking about how maybe we should think of edge cases as something called stress cases, and I wanted you to expand on that idea.
Yeah, so as you say, when we talk about edge cases, we kind of, I mean, literally the term, as Evan Hensley observed once, the term is telling. It's like you're defining the edges of what you care about, basically. And when you say edge case, you're sort of pushing something off to the side. It's like, well, maybe we're not going to worry about that, or maybe we'll worry about that later. Of course, later in many cases becomes never. Yeah, because we're all busy.
Right.
I get it, but in a lot of cases, an edge case, if you think of it as a stress case, and there are a couple of ways that this can play out, it doesn't have that connotation of this is a thing that we can ignore necessarily. It's this is a thing that we should actually think about. So, as an example, sometimes edge case can be, hey, it turns out that in like 0.5% of installs, WordPress fails to do such and so correctly. I'd say, well, 99.5% of people it works fine. 0.5% it doesn't. That's an edge case. It's like, well, maybe it's a stress case because maybe that's pointing to a flaw that will become worse later, or maybe it's it's probably telling you something that's that thing that should be working is not. And maybe you find out it's because, okay, in 0.5% of cases, people still are, running PHP 2, and this code doesn't run in PHP 2, and then that at least tells you something. But it might be, oh, well, when people have this other, this plugin installed, then this part of the core code fails in this way, and oops, turns out that's a security flaw, as an example, right? Mm-hmm. But there's another way that this comes out, which is, and it's one of the things I talk about in that I talked about in that keynote, which is in WordPress. There's, and this actually, I did some more software archaeology. It turns out that the error message cheating,
Yeah.
actually comes It comes from B2. It actually starts in the B2 code base.
Oh, it goes that far back?
It goes that far
I
back.
did not know that. I thought it was whenever they came up with the WP dive function. I thought it was part of that. I didn't
I
realize it went
thought
all the way back to
I,
B2.
I thought the same, but I downloaded, because if you go to the previous versions page and you go like way back, you, anyway, so it's possible in certain cases to get it was possible in certain cases to literally, if you were trying to do something, just get a blank page that just had literally the words cheatin', and I say as in UH, which
Yeah, it's not even spelled correctly.
well, um, and so supposedly, at least at a certain point in time, supposedly, you could only get that if you were trying to exceed your permissions level, if you're trying to do something that you didn't have permission to do. Okay, but there was a later point in time. There was I think it was WordPress 3.4. I could have that version number wrong, where a lot of people started seeing it. Because of some, who knows, like this piece of code over here got updated, and so it interacted with this other piece of code, and so a lot of people were getting this message.
It had a lot to do with theme authors and theme developers on making sure some type of backwards compatibility they were building in, but it was leading to a lot of people seeing this error, which at one time it just said cheating out the white page, and there was no link, no back button, no explanation as to what you were doing, and it was, to a lot of people, it was like WordPress was insulting them, like accusing them of trying to cheat the system.
Right, when they were literally doing something that they had done 100, 1,000 times before, but they upgraded WordPress, and all of a sudden this thing that they had always done broke. Right, they didn't know that it was the weird permission shenanigans that the theme that they were using had coded in. Like, no idea. And if you go and you look for, there's a WordPress track entry for this error message that's like 6 years long.
Yeah, 6 years old. I went through it and read it today, actually.
Yeah, and there's it started out with, hey, this is not really very helpful. Maybe we should be more helpful. And for years there was this argument about, well, this is part of the character of WordPress, right? We don't want WordPress to become boring. This is kind of funny, but to those people who are not part of the WordPress core and don't read track entries, and all they did was upgrade WordPress because they knew that they should, and then all of a sudden they got this. It wasn't funny, and it was off-putting. It was there were
frustrating.
Yeah, very frustrating, very off-putting, and mocking is the way it would feel. Now, at this point, you can still get this error, but it's been updated to the point where cheatna is now in like a big old H1. But then there's a paragraph that at least tries to give you some idea of what it was that triggered this particular error, which, to me, right, like people who see this, like these people in the situation who, I'm running my personal weblog, or I'm running my business site off of WordPress, my one shop, seasonal business on WordPress, and I upgrade WordPress like a good WordPress maintainer should, and then all of a sudden I'm getting this error message, right? That's very stressful. That's a stress case. And if it had been thought of as a stress case, it might have provided a little more impetus for people to say, okay, yeah, maybe we should make this more clear. Like that clarity could have come sooner, and there could have been better error messages before we had this problem with when WordPress was updated and all these people's installs broke.
Does it sort of boggle your mind that after it took 6 years of discussion and off and on during various release cycles and trying to get people to stay on board and get attention with it to work on it, and B, even after all that, it still says cheatna. That's still there.
The first part doesn't boggle my mind because I think everyone regarded it as being kind of an edge case, right? It's kind of nobody should ever really see this.
Yes, that's what the initial explanation was. That if anyone was able to see this via accessing it via the UI, that was a bug.
Right.
That's
Right.
the way it was being treated.
Or they really were trying to do something they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
But of course, how often do people intentionally do something they shouldn't be doing, as opposed to unintentionally do something that they shouldn't? Right. I do things unintentionally that I shouldn't on computers all the time. It's the number of error messages I get is enormous. So that part doesn't surprise me. It's there's a part of me that feels like, if you're gonna, yeah, it boggles my mind a little bit that it still says cheating, and for that matter, that it's been promoted to a big old H1. So it's completely in your face. I mean, like I say, at least it then says, right, you don't have permissions to access this or whatever. Like I've gone through the code base recently, and it's there's like 28 different ways you can invoke it, and there are a bunch of different messages to say, give some idea of how that would be. But yeah, again, I mean, imagine you're somebody who's trying to set up a site for a friend, because they're one of their family members is going through a difficult medical situation, and they're trying to set up a blog for them to be able to share what they're experiencing with friends and family, and they're getting this cheating on. It's like, you know what? I don't need this right now. I'm not cheating. I'm just trying to set this up so that my friend can share what they're going through, and maybe and get a little bit more support for themselves. And maybe I don't need to be messing with WordPress. There are plenty of other CMSs, and
and plenty of other business models out there like Wix and Squarespace and all of that, and
right.
they don't clog their code with insulting results.
I don't want to go that far because I don't know. Maybe they do.
Yeah, they could.
Right. Because there's this instinct, I think, to try to break up the tension with a little humor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So.
But at the point of experiencing a bug, the first thing you get is frustrated, and the last thing you want is the software to be giving you humor.
Right. So MailChimp has this website called voiceandtone.com.
Mm-hmm.
That I recommend anyone look at, and they actually, the URL says it all, right? There's a difference between voice and tone. Your voice can be consistent, but your tone can still change. So MailChimp used to be known for like all these little cheeky monkey messages, and little jokes and clever little bits of humor and whatever. And Keiki for Lee, who's one of their leads, is actually. Sarah Wachter-Becher and I interviewed her for our book called Design for Real Life. And she said that over the years they've actually gotten away from that in certain areas. And if you go to voiceandtone.com, it gives a whole set of, circumstances in which copy might be written, and so you like success. A success message is one of them, and so it says right on the page for success messages, like here are the emotions that the user is likely to be feeling, and here are some writing tips, and then you go sort of through the spectrum from success to error messages, and here are the emotions that the user is likely to be feeling, and here are some writing tips, and it's things like be serious, don't joke around with people who are frustrated, because it's rarely ever a good move. John Scalzi, the science fiction author, has an aphorism which I'll clean up slightly. He says the failure mode of clever is jerk. Actually, he doesn't use the word jerk, but I'll keep it G-rated here. And that's the thing, right? Like if you're trying to be clever in moments of tension, you're much more likely to come off as a jerk as funny. And I kind of feel like the cheating message is falling prey to that, right? Maybe there'll be a few people who see it and they just kind of laugh. It's like, no, I'm not cheating, you silly piece of software. Why are you being so funny? But that doesn't seem like a very common response. It's more likely to be, wait, what are you talking about? Screw you. I'm gonna try something else. Like I'm gonna go, Squarespace. And like I say, for all I know, Squarespace might have a thing where like a certain rarely seen error message has some kind of joke in it, right? Hey, looks like you've, and I'm not saying the Squarespace does this. I don't know, but I could maybe there would be an online sort of blogging service that would say something like, "Hey, looks like you've failed to input the correct password for the 5th time. Maybe it's time to get checked out for Alzheimer's." Right? Which, okay, we laugh. It's clever in this moment because none of us have Alzheimer's, but somebody who just got an Alzheimer's diagnosis,
Not fun.
that's going to be horrible.
Right.
Right? Or somebody whose mother just died of Alzheimer's, effectively. That's not funny. And so what what Design for Real Life, the talk and the book are about, are basically saying, like, we need to think ahead. We need to think of these things through and say to ourselves, what are we assuming, right? And what if we're wrong?
And
right.
And for our listeners out there, if you're not picking up on this already, I think the best way to explain this and the best example you have is when you shared. Now, unfortunately, your daughter passed away from a brain tumor 2 years ago, June 7th. And 1 year after that happened on Facebook greets you with this image of your daughter, and there's all this clip art as if it was celebrating your daughter's death, which is completely not what I don't think Facebook was intending to do.
No, not at all. I mean, I've talked to them since. So, yes. So Facebook's year in review, which probably many listeners are probably familiar with, is a feature that they have at the end of each year where you can have it like generate a photo album, or I think sometimes it's a video drawn from your pictures and posts for the year, and it's completely optional. But so what had happened was, as you say, June 7th, 2014, our middle daughter Rebecca died on her 6th birthday, actually from what turned out to be glioblastoma multiforme. It was initially diagnosed as anaplastic astrocytoma, but apparently the two are very close to each other in form. But at any rate, so she died that June, and then in December, like, year in review had been happening, and I had been studiously avoiding it on Facebook because I knew what my year had looked like, and I really didn't want to relive it in that form. But then Facebook had an ad that they put into people's timelines if they hadn't done year in review, basically a call to engagement, right? Which is something that we design for all the time. And it basically, what it would do is it would take a picture that you had posted that year, and from what I can tell, it picked the picture that had the most engagement, and I'm going to put air quotes around engagement, right? Whichever image had been engaged the most, and it put it in this circular frame, and around this circular frame was like this little clip art party scene. And it's like, Eric, here's what your year looked like, right? He's like, woohoo, your daughter's dead. I
actually remember a lot of media and press surrounding that, too.
That was actually my fault.
Oh.
As it turns out, because I saw this, and I was stunned and horrified. It was kind of emotionally, it was kind of a punch to the gut just to see this out of nowhere, right? Because this was not something that I had gone looking for. It was just inserted into my timeline as an ad. So anyway, I took a screenshot of it, and I just decided to write a quick blog post because it was in line with stuff I had been thinking about, and I had done a talk about recently, which was sort of this idea that we're not thinking about these sorts of crisis situations in our design. We're focused on the ideal outcome, because year in review was completely designed for people who had an awesome year and wanted to share it with their friends. It was perfectly designed for that outcome, right? But the team hadn't thought through, what about people who did not have a great year? What about people who had their worst year ever? So, like, I saw this, I read this blog post, and I figured, like, that my readers would see it, some of my colleagues would have something to think about. And it ricocheted around sort of the tech sphere a bit, and then Andrea Peterson at the Washington Post wrote a story, and this is what turned it into a global news story. She got a quote from the project lead for a year in review at Facebook, in which he apologized for what had happened. And so the story became Facebook apologizes, right? Because that doesn't happen very often, or at least it didn't at the time. That's why it became a global news story. It was, Facebook apologizes for what thing that they did. But yes, it became a global news story. It actually became, I think it was Salon's Internet Outrage of the Day for December 29th, 2014, which they let people vote on whether or not this was a real outrage. I was one of the people who voted no because it was not an outrage. It's so common that it can't be an outrage. This sort of thing happens all the time. We all do it. I've done it, right? In the past, I've probably done it since, where I'm focused on and this sort of idealized outcome. It's like, what is the best possible outcome for this? I'm going to push for that, and not thought about, what is outside that vision, what is outside my experience. It's not easy. It's a skill. You can learn it, and it takes practice, but it's not simple. I mean, we're seeing it with Pokemon Go, right, where there are Pokestops where you can hunt for Pokemon, pocket monsters, in the National Holocaust Museum or in Auschwitz or the 9/11 Memorial. Like, so somebody posted a picture on Twitter. They sent me a picture that shows one of the water Pokemon floating on their side in the 9/11 Memorial pool as though it's like a dead fish. Right?
How about that?
Yeah, right. And we there's kind of that uncomfortable laugh, like, oh yeah. And the Arlington National Cemetery has asked, and the people who run Auschwitz memorial, the memorial there, have asked that people not play Pokemon on their grounds because they don't feel it's appropriate. But this, it's an interesting question. A humanitarian agency recently, I think in the last day or so, posted a thing saying, Pokemon players should refrain from hunting Pokemon in the Bosnian minefields. But like Niantic doesn't have a way to set a zone to say don't go here, right? Like let's block out Arlington National Cemetery. Let's block out this Superfund.
Yeah, as they're developing the game, I don't think, and they're working towards that vision, no one's thinking, oh no, what if people are hunting Pokemon in a minefield?
Right. And that's what the book and the talk are about, is to say, try to identify those basic assumptions. So to go back to year in review, their assumption was, people who had an awesome year and want to share it. So, if they could have identified those assumptions, then asked themselves, what if we're completely, let's invert those. What if we're completely wrong? What about people who had a horrible year and don't want to share it? How will this design be received? And the key here is that it's not saying, oh, some people didn't have a great year, let's not do this, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, how will these design decisions be received in those contexts, and can we improve our design decisions so that they work in more cases? See, once again, saying these are basically stress cases, to say, what about someone who had a really stressful year? And in the stress case, can we design so that we handle those cases as well as the people who did have an awesome year and want to share it? So rather than making it we can only design for people who had a good year or people who had a bad year, it's let's design so that we cover all of these cases and we reach more people and our work is seen and used and appreciated by more people.
The thing I remember you saying that it kind of stuck out to me is that when you create a product or a website, that you're creating this experience with millions of people, but there are millions of individual, like face-to-face experiences that you also have to try to account for. But in that same vein, there's not one solution that can cover all those use cases, all those experiences on how somebody may interact or use your product or service.
Right. There is not likely to be one design that will cover absolutely every case, but we can do better about covering more of those cases. And yeah, you're right. That is one of the things that we say is that, or that I said in the talk, which is that, yeah, we design like the sort of the central dilemma, the most basic challenge of digital design, web design, or WordPress designer, or really any digital design, is that we're designing for millions, but every one of those interactions is personal, right? Facebook is designing for literally like 1/7 of the global human population. That is their user base.
No government has ever been able to manage that many people, ever.
But none of us see ourselves as one person in a crowd the size of 1/7 of humanity when we're interacting with Facebook. We see it as I am interacting with my Facebook, right? That is
Right. Yeah, this is my wall. This is my stuff, my images, my
stuff.
year in review. So
It's a very right. It's a very personal connection, especially in places like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or those kinds of sites where you're sharing like your personal experience in these little pieces. It becomes very personal, and you don't think of like very few people, I would say, would think of themselves as, oh well, this didn't work for me, but I'm only one of 1.5 billion people. Like I started to think that with the year in review thing after the initial shock wore off. And if people go back and they read the post, they'll see that basically what I say is like, I get why this happened, right? I understand where this came from, but this still could have been done better. It's not necessarily that it would have absolutely could have been better to the point that it would have worked for every single one of those 1.5 billion people, but we could have gotten closer. And there were some, sort of some fundamental errors of vision. It's just, again, like this is what designers are trained to do. It's what designers love to do, is to focus on that idealized outcome and say, I want to get there. I want to perfectly execute on that vision, and you start to forget that there are these other cases, as opposed to other fields of work like automotive engineering, right? Automotive engineers have to try to make the car fuel efficient, and that like good, fun to use, fun to drive, appealing aesthetically, and also not expose the occupants to undue risk. They have to think about, so what happens if a semi runs a red light and hits this car side on, and now we have side curtain airbags, and kinetic crumple zones and all those sorts of things that weren't there 50 years ago. But engineers, the automotive engineers, have learned over time. We got to think about the worst case scenarios. We're not going to be able to save everybody, right? Cars are inherently risky, and there's always going to be a situation where no matter what kind of engineering we put into this, the occupants could still be killed. But we can certainly do better about protecting more people, and that's something they're trained to do. It's not something designers are trained to do.
And what's interesting, by the way, when we talked about the place for my stuff, people forget that the first social network that we all gravitated towards was called MySpace.
Yep.
And
yeah,
that's something that I think is lost when you get something like Facebook as just the term. It's just a book. It's just a big pile of stuff that's not just me. And from a programming aspect, I think in some sense, in terms of user interaction, we've sort of lost our way.
In the realm of big social networks like Facebook and Twitter, where some of these actions or interactions with individuals happen maybe programmatically, I think is how you say the word, or based off an algorithm or something that's detected in a tweet or a message. WordPress has a development philosophy. One of the philosophies is decisions, not options. And I've seen this kind of carried over into other software products and services. And I just wanted to know, Eric, how important is it, especially in the realm of context, to allow users to make decisions versus having software or a service doing it for them, where we may end up in situations like the year in review?
I mean, it's a really hard question to answer because every situation is its own situation, right? I mean, that's the thing about both the talk and the book is that there's no pretense here of we can answer all of this. It's more about these are ways we need to start thinking. So when it comes to decisions, not options, sometimes an option is actually probably the better choice, and I'm not saying that options are always better than decisions, but the thing is to think through, like, how are we handling this, and what are the possible failure modes. In software design, there's actually, in software, at least in software engineering, there tends to be more awareness of this because you have to think about things like what happens if I don't sanitize my inputs, right? Or
do you think, by the way, that that's why the reactions instead of just the generic like came about in Facebook. Maybe that's just a filter for them to figure out what to display later based on the emotions that are carried through.
It's possible that that's part of it. I am not going to pretend that I believe that Facebook did that solely because of what happened with Year in Review. They had been talking for years, like they had acknowledged for years that people, like users, had said, "Where's the dislike button?"
Right.
And they had said, we don't feel that dislike is where we want to go. We want to do better. So they've been thinking about it for a while. On the other hand, I think maybe the Year in Review situation might have put a little more impetus into that. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think yes, there's some of that, so that they can get a little bit better handle on, what kind of post was this, right? If it got a lot of sad faces, then maybe that's not something we want to bring up later without being super careful about that. And their On This Day feature, yeah, I think they have a long way to go with it. But if you look at the design, like the visual design of On This Day, and if you look at the copy, the content strategy of it, it's a lot more neutral. It's not, hey, here's an awesome memory that we think you'd love to see. It's
right.
Hey, here's a thing that happened. Here's a memory that, like, we care about your memories and we thought you might want to see this. And then if you tell them you don't want to see it, it's like, never show this to me again. They say, literally, it says, we're sorry, we know we get it wrong sometimes. Now, I think On This Day could do way better at what they're doing, and I think they've made some errors of design, but they're still, they've worked towards that sort of thing, and I think to a certain extent over time it will be, there might be a thing that says, hey, there's a memory from a couple years ago, but it looks like most of the reactions to it were sad. Is this a thing that you actually want to see? They could do that. I'm not saying that they will. I have no idea, but they could do that. And I think that there's we create a lot of content, and there's not a lot of. So we create a lot of content, and all of our content has emotional metadata for us, right? Like this picture that I put up of a train station, right? Maybe there's this completely empty train station that I post a picture of, and a whole bunch of people are like, oh, that's a really pretty picture. But to me, there's emotional metadata there. It might be happy, right? It might be, this was me waiting for my best friend to get back from boot camp for that I haven't seen in a long time, or it could be sad because it's the last place I ever got to spend time with my father, or whatever it is, right? But that's not encoded, right? Facebook, if I put that picture on Facebook has no idea what that means, and so to be sort of constantly saying, hey, here's a memory from 3 years ago, right? Kind of risky. Like, I get why they're doing it to some extent, but it's kind of risky, especially since that emotional metadata, or that personal metadata, changes, or it can change, right? So, hey, here's a picture from 3 years ago of when you and your spouse moved into the house that you just bought. It's like, yeah, thanks. My spouse just left me 6 months ago for someone else and completely ruined my life.
Yeah, the one I got, the one I got about a month ago was the photo of my dad's house burning to the ground.
Right.
So.
Right, because I'm sure it got like a ton of comments, and they were all, "Oh my God, is everyone okay?" And this is horrible. And right, Facebook has no way to know.
Right.
So one of the ending topics or things you mentioned at the end of your keynote is this idea of adding more humanity to the web. And what does that mean to you, to add more humanity to the web?
To me, it means showing more compassion ahead of time and thinking through, like, how can our design decisions just go completely wrong, basically. How could they actually come off as being mocking or damaging, effectively emotionally damaging for people, or just add to their stress, right? Like, I mean, we all have enough stress, and there's enough pain in this world. We'd really have no business adding to it if we could possibly avoid it. And so, I guess when I say humanity, I mean the best parts of adding a little more humanity to the web of saying, ahead of time, how can we take care, right? How can we actually take human care in our work? Even if we think, oh my gosh, my work has nothing to do with this, like this has no application to my work. Yeah, it does. You just haven't thought through, or you haven't realized how it makes how that can be applied. And it can be as simple as, I'm going to throw in this error message that should never be triggered, and so I'm going to put in some, acerbic comment about, if you see this error message, you're an idiot. Because I think only I will ever see it. But, what if that's not true in 3 years? And, just those sorts of things, like, be a little more kind, right? Show a little more kindness
show empathy.
to people in the future.
It's been a big word lately on the web.
Yeah, but it's as Karen McGrain has said, there's a level beyond empathy, which is compassion. Like, empathy is feeling what another person might feel. Compassion is wanting to do something about it, and I think that's why I say to show a little more compassion. To want to do something, to help people out, or to not make their situation, a little bit worse than it already is. And clearly, like I say, it's not like there's a simple answer, right? I do not have the one simple trick that will amaze you here. It's a lot of work, and we're going to get a lot of things wrong. What's important is to learn from them and to share what we've learned, right? So that we can all learn from it and sort of start to get to that point of, like, what's the equivalent of a seatbelt and the equivalent of an airbag, and right, trying to figure out these sorts of things, and making it more part of our practice to constantly challenge those assumptions and to sort of subvert them in our own mind and say, okay, now what does this look like? And that isn't just necessarily for emotion, right? I mean, you could do it in your code, or even you could look at the content you're creating and say, okay, this about page, what am I assuming? Why do we have an about page? What am I assuming people will do with this page? What if I'm completely wrong about that? Do I even need this page, right? This is a way of thinking that can actually be used in a lot of different ways to really sharpen and improve what it is we do, because we're stress testing the work, and that's where that, again, back to stress cases, right? You're stress testing your work, and when you stress test work, it gets stronger
and profitable too, because the more that you humanize it and the easier that you make it for those on the other side, the more that they're going to relish that experience and come back and want more. And by the way, people should definitely go to WordPress.tv and watch your keynote. I watched it myself, and it was fantastic. And
thank you.
You brought up MailChimp. One of the things that I love to do after I send a campaign on MailChimp is they put the little chimpanzee hand up on the screen and say, high five, you just did it. Right. And that's a acknowledgement of success. And I always high five the monkey's hand.
That's awesome.
I always do. It's fun, right? And that's part of the appeal, and that's why I keep coming back.
In that moment of success, right? And going back to voice and tone, right? They're like, here's a time to joke around. Like, they're probably feeling really accomplished and successful, and we can be funny here, right? But they don't have a Freddie crying because you triggered an error message.
Right.
When there's an error message, it's just like, here's the error, and like here's the next steps, right? So if it's if it's a compliance alert because they think you might be a spammer, right? Compassionate design doesn't mean, oh no, it's okay, it's probably nothing you do. It's just, look, this is the error, and here's what you do next. And we're not going to joke around about it. We're not going to say, oh, cheating, huh? Which they totally could in that situation, right? Because a compliance alert literally means that they think that you might be trying to use their service to spam people.
I know. If I generated an error and I made a monkey cry, I'd feel pretty bad. I'd feel like it was my fault.
Well, but they're not trying to be funny in that situation.
Right.
And voice and tone totally says that. It's like, just be straightforward, right? It's like, this is the error. Here's what you can do next, right? Because if you've triggered a compliance alert, this is what a compliance alert is. This is what you can do to help us understand what the problem is. So
All right. So we have two more questions for you, and then we'll wrap this baby up. And they're
Okay.
completely not related to what we've just talked about. And again, as Marcus said, if anyone's interested in more about this topic, I highly encourage you to go to WordPress.tv. In the search box, type in WordCamp Northeast Ohio and look for the presentation called Design for Real Life. It's a great presentation.
We'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah, right. In fact, I may even just embed the video there too. Why not? Because I can do that in the post. So within
Don't
the last
watch it until after the whole podcast is done,
right,
please.
Yeah. So within the last year or so, I've noticed that there's been a myriad of different like CSS techniques being discussed and used in the WordPress community, and we have LESS, which is LESS, or SAS, SASS. And given your experience with the CSS specification and the technology, what is your big picture view of the state of CSS right now?
Thank you.
Big picture view. There's so many things I could say. I would say two things, really. One, and this is going to get back to something we were talking about before the show started. You kids don't know how good you got it. Which is that CSS is so amazingly interoperable and stable. Like there was a time when CSS was so like incompatible between browsers that it legitimately looked like the technology was going to fail and have to be replaced with something else, like a completely new styling language. We got out of that, and people who are interested can look up the history of that by looking up doc type switching, which is literally pretty much what saves CSS. But right, like sure, there's still some incompatibilities. Like this browser does a thing that this other browser doesn't, and that can be a little frustrating. But there's just so much overlap, and there's so much of the browsers sort of working together. It's not in lockstep, but they tend to stay very close to each other. So like one browser starts to roll out Flexbox implementation, and then the others start to roll it out because either like the specification finally got to the point that everyone felt confident starting to implement it, or one of them does it and the other browser makers go, "Ooh, we should probably keep up with that." Either way, it's pretty great. And the other thing is that Flexbox actually leads me into the other thing, is that between Flexbox and Grid, the giant layout system-shaped hole at the heart of CSS is finally being filled after literally 2 decades. Because CSS, for all that it is a presentation language, has never really been a layout language. We made it a layout language. We bent floats in unnatural and unintended ways to give us layout, but floats were never meant for layout. That was not what they're for. And CSS has never really had a layout system, but Flexbox is one part of the layout system, and Grid is another major component. And like Flexbox right now, Flexbox support is actually slightly more widespread than border radius support. So it's actually quite usable. And the beautiful thing is that if you use the supports feature query block thing, you can take your float layouts, and then you can take parts of them and write Flexbox rules to like switch off the floating and use Flexbox, and then wrap it all in a supports block that says, hey, if you support Flexbox, do these things, and boom, right? Like if for those few visitors you have that don't support Flexbox, they'll still get the old float or inline block or whatever layout, and everyone else gets the more powerful Flexbox. And the same thing will become true for Grid. Grid isn't there yet. It's not something that everyone can literally stop listening to the podcast, learn Grid, and immediately deploy Grid layouts. Browser support's not there, but it's expanding and advancing rapidly. And so, like the high level picture is pretty darn awesome.
So Flexbox and Grid are two things that is that part of the advice you would give to a possibly budding theme developer in the WordPress community, is take a look at those two things in CSS?
Yeah, absolutely. Flexbox more so because you could use it now. Grid, I completely encourage people, whether they're budding or otherwise, to to start to look at and maybe learn the basics of. But there are enough pieces of the specification that are still being sort of implemented. Like you read the specification, you go, "Oh my God, this thing is so awesome!" And then like maybe one browser will sort of support it, right? Like that's where we are with Grid right now. But that will quickly pass. I think sooner than most people realize there will be fairly widespread Grid support in sort of the public browser base. But Flexbox, I would say get familiar with it now. And Flexbox is great for basically for one-dimensional layout, so it's good for if you've got things to arrange along an axis. So like a nav bar is a perfect example of this, or a sidebar, because Flexbox can be either horizontal or vertical. It's pretty cool that way. So you can do some pretty great things. Grid is two-dimensional. It is, everything that we ever did with table layout times 1,000 times more powerful.
Nice.
And without the constraints that tables imposed. So
are we talking about in the future just kind of actual drag and drop page builders and things based on this that
entirely possible.
Down to the pixel as to where you pull it around like you're working in Photoshop?
I mean, yes, you could do that. One of the great strengths of Grid, though, is you can define a grid that's pixel-based, but you can also define a grid where the grid lines fall based on the content within the grid tracks, kind of like tables used to.
So it's really responsive then? It's
highly responsive, yes. And responsive to the content, not just the display environment. I mean, it can kind of both, but like you can set a grid track in effect, right? The space between two grid lines to say, like, make yourself as narrow as possible given the content in this track, or make yourself as wide as possible given the content in this track. Like literally values min content and max content, and that can be a little risky in some cases if you're putting a lot of text into that column, right? Like max content could theoretically mean make this grid track wide enough so that the longest paragraph doesn't have to line wrap. So, that might not be a good idea. I don't think browsers would actually go to that extent, but you see what I'm saying, where like there's that flexibility. But if you have a gallery of images and you set up your grid tracks so that they're as wide or narrow as they need to be for the images that are in a given column or row, right? You can have a grid of images with captions, and you don't have to worry about like constraining them all to be exact pixel height and width. You can just say, yeah, be whatever. And then in a given column, whatever the widest image and caption is in that column will be that wide. And in a given row track, however tall the tallest image and caption are in that row track will make the row track that tall.
So it's smart in a way that it figures out what the worst case scenario is and then adjusting accordingly.
Yes. That is the ideal. Now, again, as I say, if people immediately rush to their browsers and try this out, it might well not work at the moment, unless you're like on a nightly or a developer channel release. And even at that, you might run into problems. The thing about Grid and Flexbox is that they will take some time getting used to because they're a completely different way of thinking about layout. Even if you remember tables and spacers, Grid is still not exactly that. It will seem somewhat familiar, but people who try to like exactly map those old skills onto Grid will actually find themselves in trouble. So they're completely new ways of thinking about layout, and they can be pretty. I've squeed a few times. I'm not ashamed to say it, where I've done a thing and I've just been like, oh my god, that worked.
So the final question I have for you is a bit personal, but it's something amidst my curiosity, and when I get curious, I ask. But how touched were you by the web development community, who not only proposed that Rebecca Purple, which is hex code or pound sign 663399 be added to the CSS4 color module, but that it was officially added by the CSS working group. I mean, how did that affect you?
At the time, I don't know that it. I mean, it affected me in certain ways. So the proposal, I think, literally was made on the day of Rebecca's funeral. So I didn't see it
Right.
until a few days later. Um, and at the time, I mean, Rebecca had been ill for. I mean, well, she wasn't even ill really. Most people who didn't know she had cancer would have had no way of knowing. She just seemed completely normal, which was, I mean, in our misfortune, it's one of the fortunate things about it was that she didn't spend the 10 months between the initial diagnosis and her dying. She wasn't sick the whole time. She wasn't miserable. She wasn't, she didn't seem sick, just because of the specific way that the tumors were growing. But I was still, I mean, I was in shock. There's just no, even with several months, we had 3 months, 4 months, almost 5 months actually to prepare between when the tumors were rediscovered and when she died. You can't prepare yourself for it, and so on the one hand, it didn't hurt, it didn't make me feel better. It was like intellectually I could acknowledge that it was an honor, but when the working group got in touch with me, well, one member of the working group got in touch very, very tactfully and said, look, there's been this proposal. We're not going to do anything about it without your approval. Take your time. And I wrote them back and I said, there's no way I can objectively evaluate this. The working group needs to decide whether this is a good idea or a bad precedent or whatever, and that I will support whatever the decision is, because the cliche is it was an honor just to be nominated, but it was. Even if the working group had said, what, no, this shouldn't be in the specification, I would have blogged saying that I supported the decision, and I would have because I can intellectually I can understand that, but when I see it now, when it comes up, or when people mention it, I mean, it's bittersweet, but it's more positive than anything else. Just the idea that there's a memorial, right? There's a remembrance of my daughter in a corner of a language that I spent so much of my life sort of exploring and explaining and I guess promoting in a sense. It's kind of amazing, and I think to some extent, I think what really touches me is the way that that decision, that proposal and the decision actually touches other people. It made so many people proud to be a part of the community that would think of that kind of a memorial and make it happen. I think that's really what touches me, even more than the thing itself. Is just that there's so many people who have said I'm so proud to be part of a community that would be that caring, and I guess I am too. It's hard for me, again, because it's about my daughter and everything that happened. It's hard for me to just sort of say I am so proud to be a part of a community that would do this because it's so close to me. But
right.
I see people, say that on, online, or they've said it to me, or Kathy Sierra has said that it's one of the very few things that's given her hope for the future of the web, and that's that's people bringing themselves to it, but at the same time, it's kind of amazing.
And I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience about all this. Is I think it was around 2 years ago where um, I'm I pay attention to what goes on. It's my job. It's what I make a living doing, is paying attention to what goes on in the WordPress community, and I follow a lot of developers, designers, theme authors, and I remember the um, the tweets that were being passed around, probably by Jeffrey Zeldman. I follow him, and a few other people in the WordPress community about your daughter. And I remember reading about Rebecca Purple and the color and the hashtag and everything and so forth. But I not until recently, like when at WordCamp Northeast Ohio, did I realize it was you. You were the father of Rebecca, and uh, uh, ironically, you were wearing, I think it was you were wearing a purple suit there during the keynote. I
Yeah,
think that was
purple shirt. It's not ironic. It's intentional.
intentional, right? Bad choice of words there.
It's okay.
But that's how I came about figuring you out. And lo and behold, to me, hey, you're local to the area. You're a Cleveland guy, so proud to have you in our city. And I know it was an extremely tough loss to lose your daughter, but it was just sort of something to behold that the community would rally around. And I think you put it eloquently, when something you spent so much of your life working on, promoting, helping, editing, fixing, not just a small piece of that in remembrance of your daughter, is right there with you too, right within the code. And it's a beautiful shade of purple.
It is.
So I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience there. But Marcus, anything you want to say to Eric here before we wrap it up?
Well, we started the show off talking about, designing for humans and, being able to interpret what humans are feeling on the other side of the code. And we've kind of come full circle here as we end the show and talking about the humanity of the people that make the code and that, are responsible for platforms and languages and things like that. And, that's really kind of just I guess in a nutshell, you could say that really all we're doing here is facilitating human communication. It's not just some code that we're slapping together. It's meant for somebody on the other side, and it's created by somebody on the other side. So hopefully this episode has given people a little bit of pause to think about those things, think about more of the humanity end of this, and I think we'll be all in a better place if we do so.
Oh, well said. Any final thoughts from you, Eric? I think that was beautifully put.
No, I don't think I could do better than that. Just thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
No
Thank
problem. So if people want to follow you or keep in touch with you and read about your interactions with Pokemon, where can they read your stuff?
Meyerweb.com, MEYERWEB.com is my website. I'm Meyerweb on Twitter and most other social networks. Just pretty much Twitter and a blog. I don't do it well, and I'm also on Meyerweb on Flickr for the people who are still on Flickr. I have photos up there, but I'm not.
Can I send you an
HTML
HTML file? Will you understand that?
I'm sorry, what?
Can I send you an old school HTML file, static?
Oh,
static
hey,
message.
as long as it's all uppercase tags, then we're good to
go. Awesome, man. Thanks a lot, Eric, for sharing some of your wisdom on this show tonight and spending so much of your time with us. All the best to you.
Thanks. Same to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Eric Meyer. Just a great gentleman. Like I said, a great keynote. Highly encourage you to go check that out on WordPress.tv. And man, that was something else, Marcus. That was a great interview. Covered a lot of good stuff there.
Absolutely. That's the kind that I like. I like the kind that not only gets into the technical aspects, but, kind of touches your brain a little bit as far as what it took to get there. And Eric and I come from kind of the old school end of technology. And
no, I'll even say old school.
Well, no, but there's guys before us. There were a lot of guys before us. But in our sort of generation of tech, I guess you could say, is we it was really low tech. So not only did we understand how it worked, but we could understand why it worked. And I think that that's something that gets lost on maybe some of the newer users of the technology and the distributor, or I'm sorry, the designers and developers out there, and even marketing. I mean, I chastise people who give me terrible marketing all the time. Like, I just got an email the other day from TripAdvisor, and they're like, hey, you're one review away from your first reviewer's badge. Yay. Who cares? I'm one click away from my unsubscribe badge right now, too. You know?
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, so, we just got to think that there's things on the other side or people on the other side, and they want results, whether that be help or learning something new or commiserating with like-minded people in the community. There's always a purpose. We don't just sit here all the time and veg out on YouTube videos. Sometimes we actually want things, and it's high time that we just stop slapping together websites and make something that actually speaks to us.
And as you're developing a product or service, just ask yourself, what would a human do?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. So, Marcus, what do we have this week in your bag of plug-in goodies?
Oh, boy, we got some good ones here, and they're all human-made. This first one is WooCommerce order, delivery, or pickup with date and time. That's right, if you want to actually see a human with your goods, this is one great plugin to put in there. It's really nice because if you run a small shop that has any kind of delivery or pickup options, this allows them to, you as the developer get to provide kind of a minimum time. Like I need 12 hours for an order for them to pick it up or deliver it, or I need X amount of time to deliver it once the order's ready. This allows you to do all that. It's called WooCommerce order, delivery, or pickup with date and time. Man, these plugin names are getting long. This next one is called Haremo Social Screenshots, and quite often when we have a WordPress installation and we want to share a post, it doesn't properly put the thumbnails on there, or maybe it'll just do a logo or something like that. This is really cool because what it does is it actually takes a screenshot of that particular post with all the images and the text and all that. It's just like it took a screenshot of the website, a capture. And it uses that as the thumbnail image. And the great thing about this plugin is all you do is just turn it on and it works. You don't have to set it, turn it on, turn it off every post. It happens every time. It's called Haremo Social Screenshots. Really cool. And CF7 Messenger. This is a pretty neat kind of bridge plugin. It works with Contact Form 7, which is one of the most popular free contact forms out there. And it allows you to create a form that hooks into your Facebook Messenger. So when somebody fills out part of the contact form and hits send, it goes right to your Messenger, which is great because you can put that right to your phone or anything you want. So it's a really nice feature to have if you use Contact Form 7 and if you don't mind people blowing up your Facebook Messenger. I don't know what the controls are for this, but I would certainly put some sort of a CAPTCHA or an anti-spam on there, or it could be catastrophic in terms of blowing up your Messenger. But try it at your own risk. It's called CF7 Messenger, and those are my plugin picks of the week.
So I want to make an announcement that next week, I'm a week away, I will be heading to the state of Oklahoma for the first inaugural WordCamp event for the state, which is taking place next Saturday. And I was looking at the forecast. It's going to be about 102 degrees there, which I am not looking forward to. Yeah, so that'll be an interesting trip. And by the way, I will be traveling on a Wednesday, so there will be no show next week. So Marcus, I'm giving you the night off.
All right.
We'll have a Wednesday free, and then we'll be back the Wednesday after that, and I'll give everybody a recap of what it was like in Oklahoma, the first WordCamp, and 100-degree heat.
You got to do a Periscope or something while you're there. We got to see it.
Or Facebook Live or something to that effect, huh?
Yeah.
You could see me melt. That'll be something else.
I want to see you sweat.
Yeah. Other than that, that's about it for the show, unless you have something.
No, a lot of news out there, but we'll get to it in a couple weeks. I'm sure that there'll be some different point releases going on with that beta, and maybe we'll get a couple RCs out of that one. We'll talk about it when we resume in 2 weeks.
So that's going to do it for this week's edition of WordPress Weekly. You can find show notes for this episode and all previous episodes on WPTavern.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jeffro, that's JEFFR0. Marcus?
I've got a special little place online that's full of human beings. It's called MarcusCouch.com. You can also go to membershipcoach.com and follow me on Twitter at MarcusCouch.
And, well, not until next week, but in about 2 weeks, hopefully, we'll talk to you again soon. Everybody take care.